100 years plus of the mean nasty Australia policy, 4 intergenerational losers. My private Gippsland Fredereich IV estate. 2024, properties I inherited in Australia that others are using or squatting in illegally without my permission are not going to be swapped for vacant royal family or other properties I own in Europe, Eurasia. So that I end up with only the Australian ones. I own them all. Pretending Fredereich IV died in 1888 does not make his private Gippsland estate I inherited in 1982 someone else's property. Lunatic Australians are still holding a private Gippsland estate I inherited in 1982 that was illegally withheld from my Hohenzollern family by Australia when Fredereich IV died in Gippsland in 1916 for ransom. Particularly his personal belongings. I do not have to do whatever I am told by people descended from those who illegally withheld the estate after WW1 or people illegally renting out properties I inherited from that estate in Gippsland in 1982 without my permission. Particularly people renting them out illegally for money without my permission that have since had children using my stolen sperm without consent. The over a century-old routine by lunatic Australians inextricably intertwined with lunatic Germans with the same theme will not result in all properties I own in Europe, Eurasia, being illegally rented out for money as well. Or the offenders in Australia moving in. Or a small one-bedroom house here being handed over to me in exchange for a palace in Europe to the Australian terrorists. 100 years plus of the mean nasty Australia policy, 4 intergenerational losers. My private Gippsland Fredereich IV estate. The mean nasty Australia policy. In 1888 Kaiser Fredereich IV abdicated my royal family to his son Wilhelm II. He then spent around a year babysitting his 2 eligible nephews Prince Edmund and Prince Adolf in Germany, almost daily. Fredereich IV decided to retire from my royal family and emigrate to what is now Australia for the rest of his life in 1890, letting the family know he would likely never return. He emigrated to Australia on a ship called the Woodside, made in Belfast. He formed a homosexual sexual relationship with the captain on the way, who had known him and admired him for years, but was unaware he was seriously vision impaired. It was a very frustrating process where the captain flirted politely a lot, but Fredereich IV just seemed to stare in another direction and not speak to him about it. He finally realized when they were sitting at the dining table in the cabin and Fredereich IV was talking with him, but seemingly staring at the wall at the other end of the cabin the whole time. Within it's like you can't even see me at all. Then are you blind? Fredereich IV said, well, you should know that, how long have we known each other? They were sexual partners on an ongoing basis for the rest of the captain's life. Fredereich IV settled in Gippsland with a large number of personal belongings and keepsakes and very large sums of money made of precious metals. He settled and the captain went backward and forwards, returning to Gippsland often and always staying with Fredereich IV when he did. Fredereich IV realized he was allergic to carrot after emigrating to what is now Gippsland. As there was not any regularly available when he arrived, he didn't eat it and his health improved. When the captain died, Fredereich IV bought the Woodside and had it permanently moored off the coast of the state of Victoria, Australia. It was at Gippsland's major western port, now called Western Port Bay, for quite a while. The Boon Docks, Boon meaning west. After Federation created Australia as they knew it in 1901, Fredereich IV became an Australian citizen. He had a regular reliable means to send messages back and forth to his son and nephew, Wilhelm II and Adolf. He had already built and purchased a large number of properties and blocks of land. His 2 favorite residences are still near the town of Erica, north of Moe, near Valhalla. He had one shagger's pad with comfortable lounge and dining plus upstairs bedroom and a second one for guests with an entertainment, kitchen, dining and reception-like setup, plus room for guests to stay. He owned quite a few properties and undeveloped blocks of land. It was likely Fredereich IV was the person that moved the small hospital Kaiser Adolf was born in, which was in what is now Haunted Hills Road, Newborough, in 1889, into Moe itself. It still exists in Gippsland Heritage Park, next to McDonald's in Moe. It has a very peaked tile roof made of multicolored orange tiles, which has recently been pressure washed. It was a small, 2-attic room hospital, but was very modern and very expensive at the time. Fredereich IV's nephew Prince Edmund was murdered in 1897 by a bunch of crazy New Zealanders with blue eyes and white hair after being admitted to hospital for a casual stay with a severe case of German measles. He was fine, but they just admitted him as a precaution. He was murdered, stitched back up to cover up the wounds, and later shown to his parents, who were told he died of a very rare complication of German measles. If crazy New Zealanders try to tell someone they think is relevant, like me, what to do for them like slave drivers, and the targeted victim does not comply, they have a part Maori woman, all Maoris are really part Malaysian, impersonate Princess Clara Hitler the Hohenzollern thinking her son would be fine, then being told he died overnight in hospital. They try to look suddenly bereft like a rug pulled out from under, then grab the front of their clothing and squeeze with their hand, and say, oh, quietly. Then pretend the victim is more likely to comply with the order like a slave afterwards. When it comes to me, they usually do it after trying to make me express unnatural sexual attraction to a part Maori woman. The idiot usually says, now look at my tits, and then does her Princess Clara impersonation if I don't. New Zealand still has open slavery in some people's opinions. Whenever someone mentions the name Prince Edmund, there is always a white-haired, blue-eyed New Zealander waiting to pretend to pull out a knife to cut his throat with, like it's Shakespeare drama or something. Those people usually assume people think it's a Brit doing it. They usually only pull that one in front of anyone who appears to be part German or Gippslander. There are some exceptions because of the defunct kingdom of Prussian. Settled, gone, almost forgotten, but still a possibility to steal to any lunatic who thinks their life is a kleptomania game show contestant. Insanity is rife on this planet. If you are wondering, Princess Clara Hitler the Hohenzollern was a legitimate descendant of Julius Caesar and a ballet dancer with the Bolshoi Ballet Company before she married Prince Alois in 1885. Princess Clara quit the Bolshoi to marry Prince Alois. Frederick IV's brother, then Crown Prince Alois Hitler the Hohenzollern, was murdered in 1903 by a lunatic called Albert Einstein's terrorism group. It made 13-year-old Adolf Crown Prince at the time. Then after the firstborn child to Crown Prince Adolf's stolen sperm was born via Janet Podolsky and Einstein's terrorism group based in Switzerland, they murdered Princess Clara as well, making Crown Prince Adolf an orphan at 18. That only left Kaiser Wilhelm II, Crown Prince Adolf, and Frederik IV living in Gippsland. Nearly everything Frederik IV did afterwards was with the repeated fact, my nephew Adolf will be taking over running the royal family if my son dies or abdicates. It is all over everything he owned in Gippsland. When people vomit fictional history about Kaiser Adolf as if he was evil, they repeat all the heinously evil incidents done to my royal family I have mentioned and think, these are the things that could have turned him into a vengeful retaliating stalker psycho. Repeating subliminal references to them just makes the fiction of him turning evil more believable. Frederick IV decided to leave his shippable personal items to his son Kaiser Wilhelm II, and all his other assets in Australia to his nephew Crown Prince Adolf Hitler. All Gippsland, Australia, assets were to be changed over into the name Adolf Hitler when he died. He died in mid-1916 and was buried in Moe Memorial Cemetery in a plot near his nephew Adolf's deceased-born twin, who was born deceased on the 20th of April, 1889 in Moe. Shortly after Frederick IV died, his nephew Crown Prince Adolf was nearly fatally and very seriously wounded after being shot with an early version of the machine gun on the Western Front during WW1. His only colleague near him, where they were connected via a rope tied around each other's waist, was a man that looked similar to me, a biological web, part French. Adolf needed his heart massage during emergency surgery in a Western Front field hospital. Crown Prince Adolf spent most of the next 6 years in hospital. When Frederick IV died in mid-1916, there was an authority in Australia that had the job of distributing all estates similar to a communal government executor. He was an Australian citizen when he died. They made the decision not to immediately send Frederick IV's personal belongings to his only child Wilhelm II, and not transfer the title-deeded assets into his nephew Adolf's name, with WW1 being in progress as the excuse. They could have. Doing things like that was easier than people now assume during WW1. It had that crazy Broadway-style vibe at times. The days of this planet being like a stage play run by psycho-lunatics for the psychic entertainment of species nearby in the galaxy, that will inevitably end in human extinction starting 1993, with what turned out to be Shoemaker Levi 9, tens of thousands of small nuclear weapons aimed at Earth, which missed and hit Jupiter instead, should be over, really. It takes an excruciatingly long time for people to adjust, if they ever do, I guess. Really frustrating. After WW1 the vile decision was made not to bother distributing Frederick IV's private Gippsland estate to his son and nephew, and mean nasty Australia let it ride. During the 1920s Australia got a quiet diplomatic request from the Kingdom of Prussian, Emperor Wilhelm II, and the Constitutional Monarchy of Germany, Prince Imperial Adolf, asking what happened to Frederick IV's private Gippsland estate, which was outside my Hohenzollern Royal Family estate. The authorities in Australia did not reply. Then there was another more urgently marked request again, and the reply from the Australian authorities was that they would investigate and get back to both kingdoms about it. One of the motives for the requests was Prince Imperial Adolf's possible coronation as Kaiser. He may have wanted something belonging to his uncle for it, his second predecessor. Australian lunatics, emanating from Canberra and Melbourne, then the rest of the country's less than stable types, went into eventual nationwide tease mode afterwards. They started pretending everything they did in front of a camera, or audio recording equipment, or said that went into print, could be used to tease Wilhelm II and Adolf about not getting his daddy's personal belongings sent to him after he died, and not getting his uncle's private property changed into his name, respectively, by mean nasty Australia. Particularly the ship the Polly Woodside at the time. Every lunatic who caught on, like a fire obviously, started pretending the Hohenzollerns could see any Australian image, print, or audio recording any minute. They also decided to incorrectly assume that Wilhelm II and Adolf checked the local indigenous Gippsland football results regularly, even weekly, from what is now the AFL in particular. Particularly because both Wilhelm II and Adolf were born in Gippsland, the inheritance estate was in Gippsland, and they assumed incorrectly that both devoured any information about the place, where possible. They decided they had to do the tease thing 24/7 to make sure the Hohenzollerns saw or heard something in Europe. Because the country's indigenous national sport originated from Gippsland, Victoria hundreds of years before federation into Australia, and my Hohenzollern Royal Family had been part Gippslander since at least the 1790s, the local Victorian Football League, now the AFL, was an obvious choice for Broadway teasing. Frederick IV had also been rumoured to be casually involved with the VFL before he died at some point as well. Whenever they did something they hoped was recorded in some way to tease Wilhelm II about his daddy's personal belongings not arriving in Germany in the mail from nasty Australia for him to collect, they always pictured Wilhelm II in his 60s seeing something about it in Europe, then breaking down to crying like a distraught little indigenous boy crying for his daddy because nothing arrived, not even a letter. Same went for Adolf. They always tried to tease him for the cameras, media, and audio with the theme that his uncle's property wasn't changed into his name, and if he came here on holidays to use it, they would arrest him or remove him from the site, and try to make him cry like a little indigenous boy and asked for his murdered daddy Prince Alois, because nothing arrived, not even a letter. With particular focus on the vessel the Polly Woodside, looking lonely for Adolf moored off Gippsland's coast in their opinion. There were other boats, but that one was the only one left at the time. That's what started the nasty Australia wants the Hohenzollern boys to cry like a sobbing abused child thing in earnest. Which has never stopped, over 100 years of it and counting. The now Australian Football League was an obvious lunatic stage-like medium for it, as the sport is native to the old city of Yarragon and Yarrayalu and Gunakonai community territory. There was only one team's name that immediately sprang to mind as being obviously similar in sound to something from the estate that could be mispronounced to sound like Wilhelm II crying like a little boy about not getting his daddy's personal belongings from vulgar, vile, nasty Australia. The ship the Polly Woodside. I'll leave you to guess what team it is that is still in the AFL for now. They had a boringly and bizarrely lazy-looking faux successful period Aussie Broadway style to facilitate teasing about the ship not being an Adolf's name in the 20s and 30s that seemed to start almost immediately after the second diplomatic request was replied to with a "we'll investigate and get back to both royal families about it" that was never followed up on. The final system was also called the challenge system at the time. People still pretend to be violently slapping a Hohenzollern and challenging to a fixed duel about the Fredereich IV estate now. Lunatics hit the field with a glove on, take it off in front of the camera, hope I am watching, etc. All complicated by rumors the hideously evil perpetrator of so many vile and disgusting crimes against my ancestors, Albert Einstein, was born in Perth, Western Australia, before emigrating to Europe as an infant, and was somehow involved in some of the vulgar scrolls they called team logos there. The challenge system involved the minor premiers, top team at the end of the home and away season, having the right to challenge another team to a grand final to decide the premiership team if the minor premiers lost a finals match in the first 2 weeks of the final series. If the minor premiers lost in week 2, they challenged and played the same team again the following week for the premiership, like Fitzroy St Kilda in the 1913 season. If the minor premiers lost in week 1, they got to sit back and wait to see who won in week 2, challenge them to a grand final, and play them in week 3. Whilst the nasty Australia wants all Hohenzollerns to cry like abused little indigenous boys, teasathon about Fredereich IV's illegally undistributed estate was in progress. That Polly Woodside sounding team became the first team to appear to win every game in the home and away season, lost in week 1, then challenged the winner in week 2 and claimed to win a premiership. It was the best season on record at the time, officially betted by Street Kilda FC in 2009, but as yet unannounced or presented. One of the motives for illegally withholding the official disqualification results corrections is trying to make a Hohenzollern, amongst others, sob like a crying child about it me. With people mispronouncing their team's name to sound like a crying child, particularly Wilhelm II, saying it to sound like Polly Woodside. They still say it to sound like a crying child, and paintings of crying children went up everywhere, all based on childhood photographs of Wilhelm II or Adolf, or both merged together. That Polly Woodside sounding team went on to claim to win the same number of premierships in a row as Fredereich IV's number. 4 consecutive flags. With sounds like an impersonation of adult Wilhelm II crying like a child for his daddy's belongings all the way. And Wilhelm II was allergic to barley. When he ate it, it made him look like he ran out of batteries suddenly and got a bit congested like getting a cold. Combine the two and it was repulsively ugly. Europeans or Germans were also guilty of trying to make both appear to be crying like a child for the daddy or uncle as well. It was insidiously constant, no offense to those who did not participate, 4 decades afterwards. Whilst the authorities here illegally withheld Fredereich IV's estate to fuel it. Despite what lunatics in Australia pretended, Wilhelm II and Adolf did not wait by the letterbox every day waiting for notification about when Fredereich IV's estate would arrive, be transferred, then cry like an abused, indigenous child when nothing arrived in the mail each day. As if they both sat by the letterbox all day, every day, waiting for news on his daddy's belongings and his uncle's property assets from mean nasty Australia. Wilhelm II was in his 60s after WW1. Adolf in his 30s. Some people would argue that is all the nation is about when it loses at Broadway style. No matter how violent or offensive. Still trying to get a Hohenzollern, amongst others, to cry like a sobbing child about not getting a relative's estate delivered. Whenever a team cheats and pretends to win, they always try to appear to look like spoilt organized crime brats having the best Christmas ever for a tease, still, including Mr. Pooh, the doping cheats. Foreigners' sledging of Australia as child abuser land is justified by it in some ways. It was all complicated by Federation, 1900-1, being used to offensively and disgustingly suddenly remove Indigenous people's right to vote and run for Parliament until a referendum in 1967. That deceased person's estate authority that refused to distribute Fredereich IV's Gippsland estate after he died in mid-1916 also had to do the administration on Australian military personnel from WW1's estates, including the estates of Indigenous people amongst the 280,000 plus Indigenous military personnel enlisted in Australia's military during WW1. Fredereich IV's grandmother was an albino indigenous woman from what is now Gippsland, Princess Louise. His uncle Kaiser Fredereich Wilhelm IV was born in Bayside, Melbourne and indigenous to Gippsland, and Wilhelm II and Adolf were born in Gippsland, along with me being indigenous to Gippsland and born here. They were dabbling with pretending they withheld the estate because one of Fredereich IV's grandparents was indigenous to Australia, with the excuse that they were thinking about extending the ban on voting and running for parliament to anyone who was part Australian traced back to an indigenous person as well, amongst other disgusting sketchy plans. When Federation caused Australia in 1901, they reissued all birth certificates here, labelling anyone who was officially proudly indigenous as such on the new Australian birth certificates, so they were sure not to be able to vote or run for parliament when they provided them as proof of identity. In the end, the lunatics settled on an abbreviated loop of vile behaviour with the names of the states and territories in mind. They decided they would not stop trying to make Emperor Wilhelm II of Prussia cry like an abused, indigenous boy about not getting his daddy's personal belongings sent to him by nasty Australia, whilst using items from the collection as props to tease, which they still do to me. Would not stop trying to make Prince Imperial Adolf of Germany, who became Chancellor in 1933, cry like an abused, indigenous boy about not getting his uncle's title-deeded property changed into his name whilst illegally using property from the collection as props to tease, which they still do to me. Until both homosexual Hohenzollern boys married a female each and called them Queen of Prussia and Queen of Germany and pretended to talk about lewd sex with them often in public, for their entertainment. And if they did that, they might contact them to give them Fredereich IV's estate, whilst illegally withholding the estate and using it as props in the tease-a-thon. Things were interrupted by Adolf running for Parliament in 1933 and unexpectedly being elected Chancellor on the first official day for voting. Evil vile vulgar morons from nasty Australia, we like hearing crying like abused children land do not get part credit for his awesome good influence if they claim their evil inspired it as a response to hideous Australians. By the way, when Australia changed its national anthem and stopped using music I owned the copyright to in 1984, they started pretending the constant attempts to get people to make noises like an abused child were caused by the lyrics in the national anthem, for we are young and free, instead. Like it was absolution camouflage. Things hit a new vile peak in the 1930s. What I described was the root for repulsive and evil lies about my royal family, including emanating from Australia. Because the final series for those crazy Broadway style "It Is Now Make People Cry Like an Abused Gippsland Childland Football League" was called the Challenge System, they started pretending they hadn't distributed Fredereich IV's Gippsland estate to the two beneficiaries because they thought there were fictional people who could challenge the legitimacy of the two beneficiaries, or at least claim a cut. No cut, no distribution. Sound familiar? They started pretending Fredereich IV had 9 children and had married, then that Wilhelm II had 9 children and had married, despite the main reason the Kingdom of Prussia was becoming permanently defunct when Wilhelm II died, because he was a childless only child. Then started pretending Fredereich IV really died in 1888 instead of abdicating to Wilhelm II and emigrating to Gippsland, so they could pretend there really was no Gippsland estate at all. Using the Gippsland estate as props to tease, almost begging for proof that Wilhelm II and Adolf saw something they did with them in mind as a tease in front of a camera, microphone or put in print. Screeching like lunatics demanding someone prove to them that Wilhelm II and Adolf saw, read, or heard something recorded to tease them. Did he see it? Pant, 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 screech. If anything, it has escalated constantly since to the lunatic pantomime set we all know as doping and match-fixing tabloid land today. Almost everything is done to try to make someone cry like an abused child today. After becoming Chancellor, Prince Imperial Adolf went into career politician mode, and he was completely awesome at it. Australians living in or visiting Germany wasn't unusual. He always got a strange look on his face when he heard an Australian accent, having to resist the strong urge to impersonate one back. When he did come back in 1971, and revived me in January 1972, he used his fake Australian accent often. Australian football teams, native footy, were regulars in Germany where applicable, trying to see if the two saw anything done for a tease, possibly get proof there was some abused child like sobbing. With Fredereich IV items to flash to see if it brought it on. Those teams have vivid memories of it all. An Australian AFL team was hired to murder Adolf's older ineligible brother Ernst Röhm for Einstein's terrorism group, for example. They abducted him, tortured him, disabled him, taking film and photos as they went, then killed him and sexually assaulted his dead body French lunatic style, then used knives as if they were penises. Then arranged the body and called Prince Imperial and Chancellor Adolf to identify the body. Partly to see if it finally made him sob like an abused, indigenous boy and asked for his daddy or uncle. They won their last premiership under their name at the time the year before they murdered Ernst, one of the founders of the Salvation Army charity. They are repulsive and only pretending to be a sports team since, at best. A lot worse now with modern tech resources than they were then. Good riddance when they put the corporate bullet through them. They still have all the photographs and film of what the people from their team did to Ernst in 1934, stored carefully for reference to use whenever they get their attitude out today. It was one of the most disgustingly vile incidents of torture and murder in the history of the world, with their agreement to do it partly just to see if it made Adolf sob like an abused boy after he identified the body, after following Einstein's instructions on what to do to Ernst for pay, because he hadn't appeared to do it yet about not getting his assets from the Fredereich IV estate changed into his name in Gippsland. The Berlin Olympics 1936. That all led to nasty Australia likes to hear people sob like abused boy land putting together a team for the upcoming Olympics in Berlin, 1936. It was all themed around the fake idea that homosexuals Wilhelm II and Adolf might finally get Frederik IV's estate delivered by nasty Australia if they both married and called the female queen. By then, Frederik IV's private Gippsland estate had been illegally withheld from Wilhelm II and Adolf for 20 years. So, lunatic Aussie Broadway-style terrorist tabloid panto abuse teaser experts put together a team featuring over 90% athletes claiming to be from the state of Queensland as propaganda for the games. Some had very specific instructions on how to remind Adolf of his older, ineligible brother and post-WW1 charity army legend Ernst's murder in 1934 if nothing else worked when they were trying to make him play along or sob like an abused, indigenous boy about being deprived of his uncle's Gippsland estate for 20 years. Lunatics in Germany who were asked politely to participate in a quick group imperial salute to Prince Imperial Adolf ignored the details. Whenever they were asked for a quick voluntary one, they did a Wilhelm II salute instead, and started jiggling slightly and making strange noises saying, "Oh, Wilhelm II is the last emperor of Prussia, and when he dies, it is going to become permanently defunct. What are we going to do? Oh, Wilhelm II," over and over again. The Australians trying to make Wilhelm II and Adolf both sob like abused children about not getting Frederik IV's estate with props to flash, claiming to be there for the Olympics, suddenly thought it was perfect camouflage for the noises they made trying to explain what noises they wanted from the two royal families' heads of state. But, whenever the lunatics in Germany did a Wilhelm II salute for no valid reason, the Queenslanders there did a map of the coast of Queensland instead, and stuck their arm up at way too high an angle. Pretending they might get one or both to marry a woman in exchange for the idea of getting Frederik IV's estate delivered, or public noises like a sobbing child. It was vulgar, repulsive, disgusting, discriminatory, at times violent, public, and as far away from a genuine sports team attending a games as it gets in context. And German lunatics, amongst others, were happy to feed Wilhelm II barley beforehand for them. It all resulted in the Australian Olympic team competing at the Berlin Olympics in front of Prince Imperial and Chancellor Adolf Hitler the Hohenzollern, with Emperor Wilhelm II nearby winning a total of 1 bronze medal at the Berlin Games. Australia won no gold medals at the Olympics in 1904, the year after Crown Prince Alois Hitler the Hohenzollern was tortured and murdered, and his 13-year-old son Prince Adolf was asked to identify his body, 1920, held just after WW1 ended, where Australia had not distributed former Kaiser Fredereich IV's estate to his son Wilhelm II and his nephew Adolf after Frederik IV died in mid-1916, 1936 in Berlin, see above, and 1976, ruined by another AFL club who cheated against its own country's Olympic team in exchange for keeping access to experimental satellite weapons to cheat with. They were almost randomly offered access to them in 1973 because their colours most closely match Olympic medal colours. That athlete that won Australia's only medal in Berlin was not from Queensland, even if the records now say they were. They came home with their attitude between their legs and turned into what I know them as today. Worse, but with almost utopian-looking laws where applicable, thought of by people like me, and stolen where applicable. The Australian, having a go at Utopia curtain, is generally towards the right ideas, but the ulterior motives are extremely offensive, torn, soiled, and like a tabloid went with politicians gangbanging a whole live to get offers from a terrorism group for a deal or two, and didn't bother doing the cleaning afterwards. Some people think everything from them, every minute, is still trying to make an adult sob like an abused child. Including actual assaults that usually cause that sort of crying. Adolf was Coronated Kaiser of Germany on the 18th of January, 1940 with Emperor Wilhelm II present. He was in a sexual relationship with a homosexual male Jewish rabbi at the time. Wilhelm II died, and never married, childless, only child, when he was murdered in 1941, by people who took photographs of his dead body afterwards, which semi-spawned the movie Weekend at Bernie's, apparently. Wilhelm II died in 1941 without ever receiving his father Frederik IV's Gippsland personal belongings from Australia in the mail that were supposed to be sent to Germany in 1916. After WW1 at the latest. Kaiser Adolf was abducted from a hotel in Berlin in December 1943 and illegally held as a prisoner of war cum failed extortion plot torture victim until late 1959. He made his way to Italy, was tortured and interrogated there until 1961, and took diplomatic asylum on the 12th of August, 1961, adopting the pseudonym Wolfgang Alphonse. He was a very muscular and powerfully agile man in his 70s then. The nasty Australia tabloid terrorism show had by then swapped to teasing the Habsburg royal family. It was regarding Prince Sebastian Habsburg, my great-grandfather, being terminally ill and in palliative care in the late 1950s, whilst his eligible grandson Kevin Webb the Habsburg, my father, married for the first time in May 1958. His new wife Judith got pregnant shortly after the wedding in June 1958. They behaved like Prince Sebastian Habsburg would become hysterically excited, on the edge of his seat daily, about the idea of a new eligible Habsburg child being born to his grandson Kevin in Australia before he died, if he hung on long enough. And behaved as if he assumed he would get a photo and some information, if he did. As if he was fully intensely aware of it and would definitely get a letter and a photo of the new baby, if he lived long enough. So, they pretended he was struggling to hang on, looking like a person watching a lotto draw and needing the last number to match to win the jackpot, but slow motion over 12 months or more, and convinced themselves he thought he would get a letter and a photo, even made plans to block it to try to make him sob every day if one did get sent, and they stole it and teased him about it. Completely insane all the way. My Habsburg ancestors were part Gippslander before my Hohenzollern ancestors. When my mother was pregnant in mid-1958, they swapped her with an identical look-alike female who was only vaguely related to her, who was pregnant with a neo-Nazi called Ricky O'Shea's granddaughter. Asche was tried at Nuremberg for pretending to be Hermann Göring, escaping jail in December 1943, and torturing the homosexual males illegally detained in Dachau prison until the end of WW2. Ricky Asche had tortured Prince Sebastian Habsburg in Dachau prison when he was illegally held prisoner there in 1944-5. They pretended Prince Sebastian was hysterically excited during the pregnancy, hoping to hang on long enough to see a photo of the new eligible Habsburg child and get a letter, regardless of his state of health. As if bouncing on the edge of his seat every day, regardless of how unrealistic it was. Then when the imposter wife's Asche granddaughter got born and illegally registered to my parents at birth as if my father's child, they pictured themselves using the vile swap to replace the idea of a new eligible Habsburg child if sanity prevailed amongst the directly involved, for the granddaughter of a neo-Nazi who tortured Sebastian instead. To make Prince Sebastian sob himself to sleep every night until he died. Metaphorically speaking, in most cases, they were just pretending everything was as they said it was. It was an extension of the illegal torture of people illegally detained by neo-Nazis in maximum security prisons they illegally entered between December 1943 and mid-1945. Post-World War II free-range prison camp torture of the homosexuals who survived until the end of World War II in Germany. When Australian military personnel returned to Victoria, Australia after World War II, the people here welcomed them home with V-Day and other celebrations. Some waiting until the returned service personnel seemed to relax, before letting them suddenly know that, quote, homosexual bumfucking had been banned and made illegal whilst they were gone, as if to coincide with torture of homosexuals in Germany by neo-Nazis starting December 1943. Some even claimed it was a deal done to end World War II. As if every country had to set up a place to torture homosexuals in or the war would have never ended. Then started pretending V painted everywhere, supposedly for V-Day, really meant if homosexual men wanted to fuck, it would have to be a vagina or nothing in the state of Victoria. Footage of V-Day celebrations in the state of Victoria, including before any returned service personnel had arrived, is repulsively vulgar to look at, if you know what you are seeing. Though if the laws look almost utopian in acceptability, then the abuse can be worse and maybe nobody will notice, curtain. The other excuse is pretend balancing action, morally correct laws within evolution equals private abuse and torture of the people who they are about. They pretend they can pretend anything they like if they pretend there was only 3 Indigenous military personnel enlisted in the Australian military during pre to post WW1, instead of over 280,000. We want you all to sob like abused Indigenous boys and girls about Indigenous military personnel being UN acknowledged and pretend forgotten land. Some do the lunatic psycho overexcited squealing crime brat noise constantly about the idea of a real Indigenous person that's family of a WW1 or WW2 military member showing up to a dawn war memorial service almost constantly. So, they can change the service depending on who it is they are tracking to offend, and then claim there was only 3 Indigenous people in the military and record the look on the target's face. A lot of people who actually attend war memorial services held regularly here as publicly advertised and reported are not trying to be all that respectful in any way. Quite the opposite, particularly regarding Indigenous personnel. As I have already said, Indigenous Australians were not allowed to enrol to vote in elections between 1901 and 1967. Any enlisted military personnel that were not on the electoral roll in the meticulously maintained records were a nearly 100% chance to be Indigenous. Prince Sebastian Habsburg, my great-grandfather, died in 1960. When he did, my great-grandfather Kaiser Adolf Hitler the Hohenzollern was present. Austria and Hungary were contacted by lunatic Australians, and the decision was made by Austria and Hungary to illegally withhold the Habsburg royal family estate from the Habsburg family beneficiaries, with no official reason because it was illegal. The most used excuse was because all of the beneficiaries were Australians. Based on the fact that Österreich changed its name to Austria, which is Australia's name with 2 letters removed, specifically to stalk Australia, in reference to Gippsland in particular, without my Habsburg ancestors involved at all. For no valid reason. It was also the estate of a homosexual man who never had sex with a female, but did have legitimate eligible children, who left it all to his eligible Australian citizen royal children, who had homosexual children born in the state of Victoria. Homosexual bumfucking was banned by lunatics during WW2 territory amongst them. The lunatics, including Footy, who thought they propaganda profited Aussie Broadway lunatic style when teasing Wilhelm II and Adolf about Fredereich IV's Gippsland estate being illegally withheld from his son and nephew starting mid-1916 by mean nasty Australia, assumed if Austria and Hungary withheld the Habsburg royal family estate from the Australian beneficiaries, that had all emigrated specifically to Victoria, they may hit the jackpot again like the 20s and 30s. They started going for it immediately with the tease, with some of the beneficiaries semi-conveniently living in the epicenter of the teasing, Victoria, Australia. It went from a remote thing to tease people living in Europe, to a constant blaring in your face megaphone thing to people living in the same area. It all started with a quasi-ceremonial, one of them married an Indigenous Gippsland woman and made her a Duchess of Austria and Lady of Hungary. My grandfather James marrying my grandmother Myrtle is who they were referring to. My grandmother had died in the early 1950s and my grandfather Duke and Lord James had moved to Queensland to quietly live as her widow. My grandmother Myrtle was actually well known in photographs and film due to circumstance instead of fame. She was in the Guard of Honour directly behind the covered coffin of her uncle General Sir John Monash when he died in 1931, as she was his next of kin when he died suddenly. My dad Kevin and Uncle Ian Webb also being in that Guard of Honour at his state funeral. It was a full Australian state funeral for Sir John and was filmed for the military and government records. As of national importance. The royal Webb, Habsburg, couple and family were right there in front of the 300,000 plus people who attended, at the front directly behind his covered coffin. My grandmother Duchess and Lady Myrtle followed it unassisted the entire way, using only the noise it made as it moved to guide, as she was vision impaired. My father Kevin thought she was very brave when he was watching slightly behind her, at 15 months old. The granddaughter of the neo-Nazi torturer of Prince Sebastian Habsburg during 1944, Fives, Ricky O'Shea's granddaughter was born and illegally registered to Prince Sebastian Habsburg's grandson Kevin and his wife, at birth, as if Prince Sebastian's grandchild, on the 25th of March, 1959. They had been teasing my family that what was supposed to be my father Kevin's first legitimate eligible child may look like his mother, recently deceased Duchess and Lady Myrtle Webb the Habsburg, as if it would cheer everybody up, including Prince Sebastian Habsburg in palliative care, terminally ill, and my grandfather Duke and Lord James. They teased knowing my father Kevin's child, already stolen before birth, wasn't going to be born locally or registered to him and his wife. That Prince Sebastian's neo-Nazi WW2 torturer in 1944, Fives' granddaughter was going to be instead, and its mother was an imposter pregnant with a person conceived to be an intruder in my family unit. 16 days before the neo-Nazi O'Shea granddaughter Brat was born, as if my father's daughter, a new toy doll, partly old German style, was launched internationally called the Barbie doll. It looked almost exactly like my grandmother Myrtle in footage of her at her uncle Sir John's state funeral in 1931. Allegedly, it was so they could get it out and flash it around to tease my family that O'Shea's granddaughter went home with my parents as if their daughter, instead of the real firstborn, which could have looked exactly like Myrtle and cheered my family up after a rough patch. It soon became popular for being educational. Some people even stated the name Barbie was short for Prince Sebastian, hoping to get news of a new Habsburg baby before he died. The reason Americans were involved was that my father's great-grandfather, homosexual Emperor Franz Joseph I, was raped by a North American female, which resulted in an illegitimate, illegally caused pregnancy. He screamed for help during the assault, and for quite a while afterwards. People do impersonations of him screaming constantly, including in film and public, usually USA residents. A scene out of a Steve Martin film called Parenthood, where a child character loses his repeater, is the approximate noise. North American organized crime have been trying to steal a cut of the Habsburg royal family estate off my Habsburg, Australian Webb family ever since, for descendants of that pregnancy. As if they have a valid argument or claim. They didn't get their way trying to force the Habsburg family to pretend it was some type of consenting sex and cough up property and assets if not royal title, so they persisted. They even ended up pretending a child born from a rape of a homosexual royal is preferable to a legally legitimate eligible child born with consent, no sex, and no marriage, because at least there is the hint of some type of sexual contact. Even dabbled with making it official national policy of the United States of America toward royal families. Prince Sebastian Habsburg was the only eligible legitimate child of Emperor Franz Joseph I. He was the last prince of my Habsburg royal family. My grandfather Duke and Lord James Webb the Habsburg used to sit on his grandfather Franz Joseph I's knee often at family gatherings, private events, and visits, until he emigrated to Australia with his mother Ada Snowden Cooper. They were very close when he was a young child, as they were both genetically naturally pattern bald. Franz Joseph I used to educate James on what happens when people are pattern bald when they become adult, and was very reassuring about it. Kaiser Adolf, taking diplomatic asylum in Italy around 18 months after his escape from jail, restarted things for lunatics who had busied themselves pretending he was the sacrificial pretend to blame for everything guy whilst he was missing, for a new thing called take-home television. I was born January and legitimately and correctly named his imperial heir Crown Prince in 1972. I was not an evil plot by Einstein, as he died in April 1970. Kaiser Adolf owned all of Fredereich IV's Gippsland estate, directly and indirectly via his predecessor cousin Wilhelm II. When I was born, and Australian lunatics were back at the nasty teas, very quietly. And still fully going for it at the beneficiaries of the Habsburg royal family estate, which just happened to be my Australian Webb family as well. Kaiser Adolf made me rightful sole beneficiary of all his estates, which included Fredereich IV's Gippsland estate from way back to mid-1916. Kaiser Adolf moved to Australia to live just west of my hometown of Yarragon in 1978, to be near his only remaining direct royal family, me. My childhood family home is in Campbell Street, Yarragon. His was off Hazeldean Road, in the foothills, 2 streets west. I inherited that too, in a private German Wilkid estate which includes Fredereich IV's Gippsland estate, and it has been illegally withheld from me since 1982. Along with a separate Italian Wilkid Italian estate as sole beneficiary. He abdicated the Hohenzollern Royal Family estate to me in 1977, before he moved to Australia to Yarragon. That royal estate being in my name proves the rest of the estates are mine, beyond appeal. They are still pretending it all has to be withheld until I have sex with a female, and they can watch these days, because Adolf, Sebastian, Wilhelm II, Fredereich IV, Franz Joseph I, Frederick Wilhelm IV etc. didn't. So vulgar nasty tabloid whore land Australia immediately lapsed into tease mode about me inheriting everything in Fredereich IV's private Gippsland estate, illegally undistributed by me nasty Australia since mid-1916. Every estate I have inherited has been proven to be mine and unable to be frozen or confiscated beyond appeal in the highest court available, Supreme Court, in every country the estates are in, apart from my father Kevin's, which there is no need to prove. Russia, amongst others, have all relevant documents for that one. They cannot make up fictional stories and go to court with them anymore, like it is daytime television for satellite perverts, terrorists, rapists, disfigurers, and sport beggars to masturbate over. But they pretend constantly. 52 years of pretending it will be all theirs any minute. My Fredereich IV estate includes the ship, the Polly Woodside, and all Fredereich IV's private belongings which they have kept as a tease, and all his houses and blocks of land from 1916. I am unsure when they started doing it, but they started illegally renting out and charging for the use of items that I inherited, via Adolf, that belonged to Fredereich IV from his Gippsland estate to illegally make themselves money at some point. That included illegally renting out the houses I own inherited off him for money, as if they are owner and landlord and they are specialist bed and breakfast, hotel rooms, or suites, etc., without my permission. They turned the Polly Woodside, my boat, into an illegal tourist attraction in Melbourne. It is permanently docked on South Bank near the Melbourne Exhibition Centre, without my permission. I went to Melbourne on a school excursion in high school in the 80s. It involved dropping in at the Shrine of Remembrance on St Kilda Road, where there are multiple statues of historical Australian relatives of mine. The bulk satellite perverts watching me illegally at the time, that I was not fully aware of at the time, didn't see what they pretended they'd see. Then, my school excursion group went to see the Polly Woodside. My boat I inherited in 1982. I got to walk onto the deck, touch the rigging, and take a look at one of the cabins, and there was an illegal list of tourist fares people had to pay to do the same, without my permission. There is only one way to describe it. People watching me live illegally went mental crazy about me getting to walk on the deck, touch the rigging, etc. With a how dare he walk on the deck of his own ship like that and touch the rigging when we are using it illegally to make ourselves money. A Robert Downey Jr. impersonation from the movie Air America is close, bouncing up and down on the sofa. They have been in my face, stalking me in public ever since. I inherited all Fredereich IV's Gippsland estate in 1982 when Adolf died. Along with Adolf's diplomatic asylum estate in Italy. The Italian citizens and others if applicable renting from him in Verona were told they had to leave when their leases ran out and find alternative accommodation, at least until I received the estate and could renew their leases. They were told to just leave at the end of their lease because there wasn't going to be an attempt to contact me about it any time soon after 1982. They had no intention of contacting me at all during the 80s. I know that the nasty Australia show, that likes hearing adults make noises like abused children and started blaming a line in the Australian national anthem in 1984 until it was changed to cause a diversion that would stop people figuring out it all started in mid-1916, invited some of the people who had to vacate properties I own in Verona and told them if they moved to Australia, they may be allowed to let out my Fredereich IV properties for money illegally to annoy people. The 2 cottages I own, that Fredereich IV lived in near Erica, north of Moe, are currently listed at around the $200 a night illegally, without my permission. There are also blocks of land in the area that I own, perennially displayed as if for sale at the local real estate agents frequently, just to see if I sob like a distraught child when I see the advertisement in the window. They are not for sale and already have pre-planning permission for development on them for me. They also have nearly all Fredereich IV's personal belongings. They have people sit with them daily in shifts, watching me live illegally on satellite footage, fondling them as a tease, who talk at me whilst doing it, whilst violating my personal space. They often hold them up whilst doing it, like a cricket player saluting a century, or 5-4. They have recently started listing them on eBay and similar sites, with photographs as if they are for sale, because just sitting there touching them whilst stalking me illegally on satellite doesn't make me sob like a child. The personal belongings and all the property, including the houses, blocks of land, and the vessel that Fredereich IV owned when he died are all officially mine, backed up by the Hohenzollern Royal Family estate being in my name officially and unable to be transferred. My royal family inheritance from my Hohenzollern family clearly states in it that Fredereich IV's Gippsland estate is outside the royal one. It also describes what is in it in full detail, down to the last little insignificantly small item and why I am the sole beneficiary of that, through what estate, under what name. Anyone who has used anything from my Fredereich IV, Gippsland estate has committed serious crimes and they scream like they have constantly and are completely paranoid about it. The details of what estate, under what name, I am the sole beneficiary of, that includes the Fredereich IV, Gippsland estate, are very, very interesting. Some people think cryptic, but that isn't a fair description. I am legally legitimately and unchallengeable as the sole beneficiary of all estates owned by a person called Kaiser Adolf Hitler, the Hohenzollern. All beyond appeal in all countries involved. They tried until they ran out of court propaganda stages in every place. Including some items listed under ghostwriting names, pseudonyms and aliases. Rumors of me owning property in Baghdad and other parts of Iraq are something I will not expand on here, for now. I'll just say those properties are not the Iraqi royal family estate. Adolf wrote a few books after he escaped in 1959, was involved in a lot of commercially released music, and actually did some interesting artworks in paint and other mediums. Some of them themed around the fictional idea of being abducted and transported to an alternative reality Earth where reputation, at the least, were compulsorily opposite. Kaiser Adolf died on the 20th of April, 1982 and was buried in the Moe Memorial Cemetery next to his uncle Kaiser Fredereich IV, whose estate properties in Gippsland were never changed into Adolf's name during his lifetime, including the Polly Woodside. All mine now. He had already reserved a burial plot for me next to his grandfather Kaiser Wilhelm I in the same cemetery. The house Adolf died in is mine too, as I mentioned. Hazeldean Road, Yarragon. I heard rumors that the Fredereich IV properties I inherited that have been rented out illegally for money were an attempt to pretend to create a fake magic reciprocation spell to try to argue that all my properties in Europe should be, too. Italians are constantly watching the hidden camera and MIC footage and audio of Adolf they filmed daily after he arrived in Italy in 1959. The people illegally renting out my Fredereich IV estate assets for money without my permission got hold of my stolen semen twice post-1988 and in 1996. They got female relatives and associates of the people renting out my Fredereich IV Gippsland assets illegally pregnant with it and had quite a few children, some now well into adult age. They are pretending I have to attempt to illegally adopt a child of one of those females involved in illegally renting out my Fredereich IV assets in Gippsland to make themselves money, attempt to officially illegally make them a prince or princess, and if I play along and appear to try, with total strangers being the children of others involved, I might finally get those assets acknowledged as my property and get to use them. But only if one of those illegally bred children gets to illegally become a prince or princess. Disgusting at best. No regard for legal reality at all. I get stalked daily by people bred with my stolen semen in females involved in illegally renting out my Fredereich IV Gippsland assets for money, as if they are waiting for me to offer one of their children the chance to illegally become a prince or princess, as if they think it is inevitable I try to do it, just to get my hands on my assets inherited from Fredereich IV's private Gippsland estate. Even though they are all total strangers that I could only recognize as the source of the extortion demand when I hear them chanting, "That's what you get for saying I won't be becoming a princess of your royal family, Mr. Webb," within a few meters of me. Those illegally bred children insanely convinced I will do it at some point, doing body twitches whilst they chant to try to spell, "If you want that Fredereich IV estate you'll do it," with fluttering eyelashes. I would like to point out that the abuse of them by their parents to get them in that mental state as adults is not my fault in any way, regardless of me being the target they are trying to steal off. When my grandfather Duke and Lord James Henry Webb the Habsburg died in the 1980s, my father Kevin went to his funeral in Queensland. My father Kevin became a Duke of Austria and a Lord of Hungary when his father died. Kevin was eventually arrested in Queensland and detained after the funeral at some point. He spent a nervous night in a lockup where the law enforcement who arrested him had some bizarre discussion about who he was and who he was related to, particularly his granduncle Sir John Monash and his mother Duchess and Lady Myrtle. He was released without charge and very, very relieved about it. He decided Queensland wasn't a place he'd like to go to again. When lunatic Queenslanders were filled in on all details, including lunatics in the USA persisting in pretending that if the Habsburg royal family estate is still being illegally withheld from my Webb family, then maybe they should get to steal some of it for descendants of the pregnancy in a North American female in the 1800s that was caused by her raping homosexual Emperor Franz Joseph I, my great-great-grandfather. The answer is a blunt no. They are not getting any part of that estate. Regardless of how many lunatics there are, still pretending they are after an illegal cut, using their political circus as propaganda for it. Lunatics in Queensland and their little lunatic buddies could not seem to help themselves after Duke and Lord James died, and my father Duke and Lord Kevin was released from a Queensland lockup without charge and returned home to me a wiser man after James' funeral. They decided to tamper with his grave, as if it would increase the likelihood of the Habsburg estate being stolen off my Webb family. They changed his middle name, Henry, to a false middle name, falsified the dates of his birth and death, and then pretended his deceased wife Duchess and Lady Myrtle's name was really her middle name, Florence, so it sounded more Italian. As if those simple changes with a replacement grave marker would get the job done and steal inheritance assets. I became a Duke of Austria and Lord of Hungary, as well as already being Prince Imperial and Prince Knight Hohenzollern, when my father Duke and Lord Kevin died in 2004. I was sole beneficiary of my father Kevin's and his older brother Ian Webb's Habsburg royal family estates and Ian's private Australian estate. Along with being sole remaining beneficiary of my father Kevin's Australian estate, apart from 10k cash to each of my mother and the 4 older females pretending to be my sisters when I grew up. Hanging around outside Habsburg royal properties in Europe taking photographs and films and plastering them all over the world to tease my Webb family is a full-time job to some. They incessantly chant, "This could be one of the Habsburg royal family properties that you should own, Mr. Webb," at me. Barbie-themed accessories were allegedly designed originally to tease my Webb family. If my grandfather Duke and Lord James Webb the Habsburg had received his Austrian and Hungarian royal family estate starting 1960 from his father Prince Sebastian, as he should have, he could have moved his son, my father, Kevin, with his new wife Judith, my mother, and the ineligible imposter wife, Pauline, spawned grandchild of a neo-Nazi named Ricky Ashay pretending to be their daughter. Ashay illegally tortured Prince Sebastian in Dachau prison in Germany in 1944-5 after escaping jail in December 1943. Into royal Habsburg properties in Austria and Hungary to live. Say a half a dozen total in both countries, including an urban apartment palace or 2 in each, and a country property in each. I am assuming crazy Austrians and Hungarians knew the bitch was not my parents' child, and was really a neo-Nazi's granddaughter with the imposter wife, Pauline. I am also assuming they ended up using the excuse that they have not distributed the Habsburg estate yet to my Webb family because the imposter wife's child to the neo-Nazi would have got to live in Habsburg royal property if my father Kevin had moved there in the 1960s, with 3 further imposter wife-spawned daughters born in 1961, 1963, and 1967 extending that insipid excuse. Also in an attempt to get my father Kevin's eligible brothers and sisters to blame my bit of the Webb family for it, because Kevin's dad married the indigenous Gippsland woman and made her a Habsburg duchess and lady, who was albino, he was too freckled, etc., etc., etc. My mother Judith died in 2018 and I was her only legitimate descendant at the time. She was also divorced by my father in the late 1970s, which resulted in her losing the right to claim from his property and personal assets, including Habsburg assets, in the divorce result in court. She got money and nothing else. So, she was not an issue when my father became Duke and Lord Kevin in the 1980s. She was already out of the legal picture completely. Anyone claiming the imposter wife spawned brats are relevant to any of my estates is a complete moron. They probably got on well with my mother and the imposter wife's daughters. Let's go bake some serious cookies for this Hohenzollern boy. Any attempt to get the granddaughter of maximum security prison escapee cum neo-Nazi Ricky O'Shea, last Prince of Austria and Hungary Sebastian Habsburg's torturer at the end of WW2 into one of Prince Sebastian's Royal Habsburg buildings to live by pretending she was Duke and Lord Kevin's daughter, Prince Sebastian's granddaughter, starting 1959, when Prince Sebastian was in palliative care terminally ill, failed. Failed forever when she faked her death in 2005 in particular, after stealing all but 20k of my father's private Australian estate off me after he died in 2004. That convoluted pathetic process when he died, where they pretended he was still married and his wife inherited it all, is their new excuse for the Habsburg royal family estate being undistributed to my web family, including me. The truth is bizarrely simple. My mother Judith did not become a Duchess or Lady of Austria and Hungary, as she was divorced by my father before he became a Duke and Lord. My mother had already been legally excluded from claiming any non-cash assets off my father in the final divorce ruling from the Dandenong Family Law Court in the late 1970s. Anyone pretending to be my father's widow, he didn't have a wife when he died, is not getting anything. Even if their bags have been packed in anticipation since 2004, the 1980s, 1959, or WW2. The faked out the theft of my father's estate off me created in 2004 is not grounds to continue to withhold the Habsburg royal family estate. Making up future excuses for it still not being distributed hasn't helped anyone out of the mess they are in. Particularly the USA and mean nasty Australia, who went around and back to the start pretending it made the two look like a solid traditional trustworthy allies. Repulsive. Terrorist extortionists will not be receiving my inherited European or Asian assets in exchange for me getting humble Gippsland assets I inherited handed to me. Nothing is forgivable. In mean nasty Australia tabloid land, or you're out. The Australian flag does not mean illegally withhold royal family inheritances from Australian citizens who are royalty, including as ransom until death, and then pretend it is a loyalty towards the ceremonial constitutional monarchy of Australia. Regardless of what is added afterwards that was made up about the names of the states and territories of Australia. My ship. The Woodside. I inherited a vessel in 1982 called the Woodside. It was the vessel that my third predecessor Kaiser Fredereich IV emigrated to Australia on in 1890. He purchased it, moored it off Gippsland's westernmost port, Western Port Bay, and had left it to his nephew, then Crown Prince Adolf Hitler the Hohenzollern in his estate when he died in mid-1916. The private Fredereich IV, Gippsland estate, not part of my Hohenzollern Royal Family estate as Fredereich IV abdicated in 1888 before emigrating to Gippsland in 1890, has been illegally withheld from my Hohenzollern family by Australian governments since the end of World War I. It is currently illegally on display on South Bank in Melbourne near the Melbourne Exhibition Centre, where people are charged money to get on board, with a small museum with artefacts I own in it, without my permission. They have been trying to use it to make every official adult member of my Royal Hohenzollern family cry like a tortured, abused, or sexually assaulted little Indigenous boy since diplomatic inquiries to Australia about the Fredereich IV, Gippsland estate from two separate realms, the now permanently defunct Kingdom of Prussia and the constitutional monarchy of Germany, were made on behalf of the two beneficiaries, Wilhelm II and Adolf Hitler, after World War I. It is on display purely so Australian organised crime government and law enforcement can brag about the estate it is part of being illegally withheld from Wilhelm II and Adolf, 1918 to 1941, Adolf alone, 1941 to 1982, and myself, 1982 to present. A tangible symbol of how depth-rately repulsive and detestable Australia really is when it comes to anyone with a true sense of family, royalty, Gippsland, inheritances and the assets of people who have an Indigenous ancestor, amongst other screaming lunatic bigotries. Whenever I walk past it, disinterested, they still try to make me sob like a distraught abused little Indigenous boy about the estate being illegally withheld since 1918 from me since 1982. Over a century. They started pretending anyone who illegally used anything from Fredereich IV's private Gippsland estate illegally for money without the owner's permission, me since 1982, has incorrectly implied long-term squatter-like organized crime rights to steal other assets off my Hohenzollern family. Then started shoving my stolen sperm up females related to the perpetrators and pretending they were getting in my royal family illegally, whether I liked it or not. One of the reasons there are so many repulsive and disguising blatant lies about my Royal Hohenzollern family on publicly available media is the Fredereich IV private Gippsland estate being illegally withheld from my Hohenzollern royal family since 1918 by Australia. They initially tried to make Wilhelm II and Adolf sob like abused Indigenous boys every day, by the letterbox, about nothing arriving in the mail in Germany about the estate to either royal family. Then started pretending both homosexual men had to date, F***ck, and marry a female, after promising to make her Queen of Prussia and Germany respectively to get access to the estate as the two new owners before the Berlin Olympics in 1936, Australia won one bronze medal at the Games. Wilhelm II died in 1941 without ever receiving his father's personal belongings from Australia in the mail. Kaiser Adolf was abducted from a hotel in Berlin in December 1943 and held prisoner of war in Yugoslavia between 1943 and 1959. After Kaiser Adolf escaped his illegal detention in late November 1959, Australia and others started pretending Fredereich IV died in 1888 instead of abdicating in 1888 and dying in Gippsland in 1916, so they could pretend there really was no Fredereich IV estate in Gippsland at all, and they could do whatever they liked with the illegally withheld artifacts and assets. They tease me daily by fondling Fredereich IV's personal items from his death in mid-1916, including doing things like sniffing his clothing and describing the smell of it to me whilst watching me live illegally on satellite and terrestrial cameras. They don't like the fact that I don't start crying like an abused little indigenous boy whenever they do it. They are not shy about getting violent offenders in to actually violently physically attack their targets if their victims don't do the childlike sobbing when ordered. They made up excuses. Kaiser Fredereich IV being short-statured, homosexual, and vision-impaired. Kaiser Adolf being abdicated to in 1918, meaning that someone who was part Iraqi and Bangladeshi took over as head of the constitutional monarchy of Germany, where the previous one wasn't, and homosexual. Wilhelm II being homosexual, a double short-statured person, and vegetarian. Etc. The usual lunatic unnatural bigotries the crime brats in Australia pretend are acceptable to carry around and flop out in public to sucker the new brats in. See organised professional sports leagues corruption here for examples. A country having an international reputation as being generally wealthy is not an exemption to torture, abuse, or withhold inheritances on a whim and claim it is a cultural thuggery tradition they know is unacceptable and illegal but can't seem to shake off.